mother talking about it at all, it feels as if there's some shame.
Yes.
Associated with having her grandson, I'm sorry, her son, her grandson associated with something like that. And it's really hard to break through her fear and what I think is shame.
That's hard. So hard. Do you know the child's name by chance?
I do. It's escaping me, right? It'll come to me before the end of the night.
And speak it when you recall it so that we can name him as we pray. Anyone else know anyone affected by this, either a family member? And so I come to this with that knowing that it's here and asking you all to think on, can we do anything about this? Really? And so the answer, I think, is that you can. And I want to share with you some of the learning, the actual helpful learning, and not this frustrating stuff that I'm dropping with you right now. That I think that you can. And when we make our baptismal promise, we say we will do that with God's help, right? We don't think we can do it on our own, and so it's going to invite some prayer and some contemplation and some calling on one another, because when God shows up, it's in us, right? She comes to us in the faces and hands and feet and hearts of one another. And so I say, yes, you can do something about this here in Columbus, Georgia, with God's help and with the help of one another. So I mentioned that we don't start by throwing some stickers around, not going to help much. So what do we do? What gives me hope and inspires me is traveling around this country and bumping into people who are doing great work on all of these hard issues. The Diocese of Philadelphia, there is a program called Heeding God's Call to prevent gun violence, to end gun violence. There's a goal for you. And so let me tell you just a word or two about heeding God's call. And you can Google any of all these that I want you to Google heeding God's call, because there's a really cool 5-minute video that you can watch that shows you how they get their churches engaged. They don't put up stickers and lecture. They know the names, the ages, birth and death dates, places where the people died, something about who their surviving grandmama is, their surviving brothers and sisters, where they went to school, where they worked. And they have these little, T-frames, and they put a T-shirt with the person's name and some of this identifying information. And they fill up a courtyard. And I'm looking at all this real estate you got around here, and I'm thinking about this and what this church could do. You name those 64 people, and it won't be the end of it. Between now and December 31, when we stop looking at 2021, God help us, it won't stop at 64. Those T-shirts out there, and we went out to the Peace Pylon. What an amazing thing that is. How spooky beautiful would it be to have those T-shirts on those scarecrow situation surrounded the peace pole looking at it. And then you would know who lost those humans represented by those T-shirts. And you would send those families a note, perhaps with a picture of their beloved's T-shirt, and invite them to come and pray at your circle. And you would set it up 30 days, 60 days, and then you would move it somewhere else in Columbus so somebody else can see it. And you would move this thing around, this floating memorial. And it doesn't have to be with T-shirts, right? What you're doing is creating awareness. There's a church in Nashville that uses bells, like jingle bells, and their banister is covered. Red for a death, Injuries, we hadn't even talked about those. How many people injured in Columbus by guns this year? Suicides, God save us. The success rate with gun by suicide. Black bells for the suicides. Domestic violence. There's so many ways that guns kill and maim and destroy lives. And so to start this conversation, what you want is an awareness creation. You want to name them. You want to remind people that they have a mother or a child or a sibling out there grieving this, and we want to grieve with them. And to acknowledge this loss and this love and connection that you feel to these grieving families is a way to change our hearts and minds and to affect the people within this parish and to let them know that this work is ours to do, to stop this violence. It's not about stopping guns. It's about stopping violence. This is one example. So I commend Heeding God's Call as a beautiful example of how you open the door to having a conversation around gun violence. I'm particularly proud of a woman by the name of Virginia Classic. She's in the Diocese of Los Angeles. You'll see a gun violence prevention handbook over here. And I want somebody in this room, and I don't care who, to take it away from me and to let it live here with you all as you discern whether and how you would like to do something about this issue. But Virginia has written this amazing gun violence prevention handbook, and it's on the Diocese of Los Angeles webpage. She happens to worship at All Saints Pasadena, which I mentioned just a little bit ago. But that's just a resource rich with ideas. What Virginia does that I think is particularly smart, and I think it's easy to replicate with just a tiny bit of money, is when she tables at her diocesan convention or anywhere, if there's a social justice fair, whatever, she shows up with gun locks and gives them away, okay? So you might take a brochure from Episcopal Peace Fellowship in our gun violence prevention workshop, but she's putting in everybody's hands that wants one a gun safety lock. And she buys them in gross. And everywhere she goes, she has an opportunity to put them out as a free gift to give somebody to make someone safe, because people die from accidental gun shootings just as surely as they die from domestic violence. So that's a useful piece of swag that you can make available to people to save someone's life potentially. What did I do with my orange book? There it is. Book studies, so easy to do in this age of Zoom, even when we can't be together. More better when we can be together like we are tonight, but we can't. This book, Rosalind Hughes, is a wonder. And the questions at the end of each chapter, no answers necessarily suggested, but it makes you think. It makes you stop and go, why? What am I afraid of? How many times do we hear in the New Testament, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. And we're so scared. This book, I can't say enough good about it. And I would say, if you're thinking about this as an issue that you would take on, that one of your early investigations is to do and I've been hearing great things about y'all are doing like lots of different ways that you're doing small group here. You know, you could do, I bet you Rosalind Hughes, and I know because she was our first speaker in our peace building series, she would get on a Zoom and do one of those like an hour segment, and then y'all could push it out to small groups and let them look at that, read the book, and have those conversations. And you could cover this whole parish in a month. This is going, you might think above your head, but not so much really. The Diocese of Missouri. They've had some unique violence there. Think about Ferguson. Think about their bishop not retiring because Ferguson happened right as he was ready to retire, and he couldn't do it. He was out in the streets dealing with all of the heartbreak and activism that came from that. But what he did, he's hired a canon, a priest by the name of Mark Smith, who is the bishop's deputy for violence prevention. He smartly doesn't call it gun violence prevention. He says violence prevention. But you know what they're talking about? Gun control. Why am I saying that to y'all? Because y'all go to convention and y'all send deputies, and y'all could suggest to your very own bishop, Rob Wright, who's a whale of a guy, that he might want to consider having somebody, given the magnitude of the problem, not just here in Columbus, but if we want to talk about Atlanta for a minute, you think there's any gun violence happening there? Mark Smith is a smart man there in the Diocese of Missouri, and he's done some good stuff. He's got some, and look on his page too. It's Violence Prevention, Diocese of Missouri. He's got these 6 modules that he's already put out with ideas of putting more out. Understanding that gun violence is a public health issue, okay? That takes the scary out of it from a personal, you're coming from my guns situation, to talk about it in terms of the fact that children die, people die. It's a scourge. And he's one of those that's also partnering smartly with lots of, the Washington University School of Medicine, get the doctors involved to have these conversations. Women's Voices for Social Justice, he's partnered with them to get those free gun locks distributed in their diocese as well. So how can you support one another in all of this work besides picking up the phone and calling any one of the people that I just mentioned? You think Mark Smith minds if somebody from Georgia calls to ask him what he's doing? No. You think Virginia Classic minds? No. And you tell them I gave you their name, and they will be happy to know that they can help you with these issues right here on the ground. But let's say this. We, Episcopal Peace Fellowship, we have a standing monthly time. It's on the first Tuesday at 7:30 Eastern Time. Our convener, Bob Lotz, gets on the Zoom, and anybody in America who wants to get on that phone call and talk about what they're struggling with, how they're having success, what legislation they're working on, what book they're reading, what movie they're watching, all of that stuff happens once a month. And so you go and you share, and you get frustrated with the work you're trying to do, and you go to that community and you talk to them, right? The Bishops United Against Gun Violence, I'm happy that our church has, at the highest level, people deeply concerned about this issue and working on it from, a government level initiatives, doing really good stuff. I hadn't even talked about Shane Claiborne yet. Some of you know who I'm talking about. Shane gets people to show up. They disable guns, they melt them down into nothing, and then they make them into, you guessed it, gardening tools, rakes, shovels. And then they take them into the church and they bless them and consecrate them and send them out to grow things rather than destroy things. How beautiful is that? Can you do it here? Yes, you can. It's happening everywhere. And that's not the first thing you do. It could be. But when you get to that place in your gun violence prevention, you invite Shane Claiborne or somebody like him. I have my peer in the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship keeps a hacksaw in the trunk of her car. That's not what it's called. There's like a real name for this thing. But she will disable a gun for you. She's taught herself how, or maybe she went to a class or something. But if you've got a gun that you don't want, because it was used in a suicide or somebody left you one, your grandpa died and gave you a handgun, and you don't want it, Deanna will destroy it for you. and make sure that it gets somewhere where it can be smelted down. But how cool to have the whole thing happen right here on your campus, right? Invite everybody in that's affected by gun violence and destroy the guns, melt them, make them into gardening tools, and then have a Eucharist to bless them and send them out to do their holy work of growing green, beautiful things. You can and should, as you know the names of these people, incorporate them into your liturgy, pray for them by name, add something in the prayers of the people. We pray for the victims of gun violence and their survivors and those who've done these horrible things by name. It's powerful, and it keeps it in your congregation's mind every week that this is something that matters to the people of St. Thomas. We have litanies, tons of them, and when we close tonight, I'll close with a piece of one. I won't do the whole thing because it's rather lengthy. It's beautiful. Happy to share it with any of you. They're on our website, the EPF at epfnational.org. Every single time I go to tell y'all what my website is, I can't remember it, but it's on every piece of paper that's over there, so you'll see it. But we have a little resource page that has litanies and liturgies and sermons and stuff, and there are many that are there. So prayer, there's a place for that. In fact, all the things that we do that don't start there might not be as full as they might be or as fruitful as they might be if we don't invite God to be a part of what we are doing. So those are a few ideas that I've collected from across the country, and there's tons more, and particularly the Virginia Classic Resource and the book that we have up here. For someone who's interested in looking at this, you can find great ideas, and then connecting with others across the country. It's useful to pick one another's brains and to learn where people have had success and where they have hit walls, so that you use your energy to the best possible end result. So advocating, I'll say this, one of our peace partner parishes, more than one, but one that is, I always like to participate since they've gone virtual. The Church of the Transfiguration in Dallas, Texas has a peace post, and once a month, a gentleman by the name of Ron Damolt, he's just like us, y'all. He reads the paper and he writes down some reactions and thoughts, and he sees where there needs to be work in the world. And once a month, Ron sets up a card table and he brings a bunch of postcards and has a sheet of typed addresses for people in government that need to hear from people. And he has a cheat sheet, 3 or 4 pages stapled together of the issues of the month with talking points, education, resources, where you go read about this in the newspaper. And people will show up and sit down with Ron. He's there from 10 to 2. And he's got pens on the table. The postcards are stamped. People write letters to their legislators. Let me tell you, an email is fine. A text is fine. But a handwritten card and different scrawl from different people across Texas coming in on a certain issue matters, because whether or not they do anything about it in Texas or Georgia or Alabama, where I'm from, it's a different thing. But believe me when I say it feels really good to fill up a mailbox with letters of advocacy around certain issues. So you could have a very discreet gun violence advocacy. You've got to find out who you're writing, who's in a position to make changes, write the mayor, write your state house, anybody who is in any kind of position of authority. You can identify those people. You can address those postcards, and y'all can send them out and make a difference around that, all the while educating one another, right? 64. I bet everybody in this church doesn't know that number. But 64 is an arresting number in a town this size. And then you add to that the number of injuries, and you start talking about which ones are domestic violence, which is drive-by shooting, which is a suicide, whatever it is by category, you'll get somebody's attention and the horrors of all of that. So, some of your elected officials are Episcopalians. You can just chunk out that baptismal promise and tie it to all this stuff and remind them that they don't get out of this so easy. We're watching. We know what you promised to do at your baptism, so do it. So we have a few more minutes, and I want to take your questions. And because some of you didn't hear this morning, if you've got other questions about EPF and how we do that work, I don't want to just limit it to the gun violence piece. But I want to say that because this plague has taught us how to use Zoom, I'm available to you. My gun violence prevention convener is available to you. If you decided you were interested in abolishing the death penalty in Georgia, holy work, highly recommend. If you want to do something about peace in the Middle East, holy work, highly recommend. If you want to do something about welcoming our brothers and sisters who are fleeing persecution, environmental collapse, war, whatever it is that's making them want to be here where they have a chance at a productive and safe existence, holy work, highly recommend. All of these things EPF tries to do to support you in doing that work. And we would just be thrilled to have one of us who is deeply tied to one of our issues, which spoke to you all, to come to you virtually. You know, I'm in the truck. Miranda's outside. If you hadn't seen her, that big RV. Stephen and I run around the country. I jump out of the truck and I talk about justice advocacy and gospel call. And then I get in the truck and I go to the next church. And I have the best job in the world. Besides, Stephen's probably got a better job than I've got because he just figures out logistics and drives us around and where are we going to have lunch and where are we going to camp and all that stuff. And we're here because Stephen, this is his hometown, and he's sitting there with his classmate, Rick. Marquette's a little young to have been in his class, but so these boys schemed at the 50th. I jokingly say, Stephen had his 500th high school reunion, 50th, and from that little happened to be with the right people at the right time. I've come to be with you, and thank you for making that happen. What a joy and a great opportunity, to come home. And I'll say, being from the Diocese of Alabama, there are not a lot of parishes that are like, really want to hear from a screaming progressive. I'm a little bit hard to take even in my own household, let me just say. But to find like-minded Christians all over this country doing gospel work, that will put spring in your step and life in your eyes and give you a reason to get up the next day and do it all over again. So thank you all for showing up and wanting to learn about this, and know that our prayer life is a big piece of this. If you pick up one of our membership brochures over here, you will see that this year we're promising to not only have that peace building series I was mentioning, but we're going to start doing Compline every single week on Tuesday nights across the country, coast to coast. Anybody who wants to pray with us is invited. We have a peace builders book club. We did this book in the Peace Builders book club. The first one we did next week is Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman, which is, canon in liberation theology anyway. Welcome any and all of you to come to that. So we got a lot of good programming going on right now, if I do say so myself. But it's it's truly to help shore us all up. This justice work is exhausting. And when you think about how much there is to do right now, it would not be an unreasonable response to just put your head under your pillow and go, I can't do it. But yes, you can with God's help and with the help of all of us who are striving out there with you. Pieces of it can be addressed. And so all the programming that we are doing is hopefully to give us stamina for the long haul, because this work's not going away. It's not going to get any easier. But I think you can make a difference in the gun violence in Columbus, Georgia. And I wouldn't be standing here saying it with a smile on my face if I didn't think it was true, because I know that it can be true. But it comes at a cost of hard work, dedication. You got to stick with it, and you got to support one another, and you got to pray for God to come into it all and to make it so. So, questions?
Are there ways in which violence in a community is handled on television